My name is Amelia Hayes, and I am 36 years old. For the last decade, I've lived in this house, on this quiet street in a suburb just south of Salt Lake City, Utah. It's a place where the silence is only broken by the distant hum of traffic or the laughter of children playing down the block. My life was, until recently, defined by a quiet predictability. I was married to Richard, a man much older than me, a man who filled our home with his presence until one day he didn't. The quiet he left behind was a different kind of quiet. It was heavy, suffocating, and it echoed in every empty room. My next-door neighbor is Liam Peterson. He's maybe 32, a corporate accountant, I think. He lives a life as quiet as mine once was. He's not the kind of man who hosts loud barbecues or has streams of people coming and going. Most days, I'd see him come home from work, give a polite wave if our paths crossed, and then disappear inside. He's lived in that small house for years, a steady, unassuming fixture in the neighborhood. We knew each other by name and the occasional smile, but our interactions never went deeper than that. I liked the peaceful distance. It was simple, at least I thought I did, until everything changed. Richard had been a man in constant motion, always rushing, his mind perpetually on business deals and deadlines. I, in contrast, was the still point in his turning world. People who saw us probably thought we were an odd pair, but in the beginning, it worked. Over the years, however, his hurried energy created a chasm between us, and my stillness became a profound loneliness. Last week, Richard died. It was a heart attack, swift and unexpected, and the news rippled through our little community within hours. I went through the motions, the phone calls, the arrangements, the funeral. I wore black, accepted condolences, and listened to people tell me what a great man he was. But I didn't feel it was my place to fall apart. The day after we buried him, the silence in the house became a physical weight. I thought I could withstand it, that I had been preparing for it for years, but I was wrong. It was around 4 p.m. when I couldn't take it anymore. I walked through my sterile living room, past the photos of a smiling couple who no longer existed, and made a decision. I knocked on Liam's door. I was wearing a long black coat over my clothes, my hair pulled back messily. My eyes were raw and tired, not from crying, but from a deep, soul-crushing exhaustion. I was holding a small, warm mug of chamomile tea, my hands wrapped around it as if it were a lifeline. When he opened the door, he looked surprised to see me. He was in a hoodie and sweatpants, clearly in the middle of a work-from-home day. "Hi, Liam," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Do you mind if I come in for a minute?" He didn't hesitate. He simply stepped aside and let me in. He gestured toward his couch and offered to make me fresh tea, but I just shook my head, holding up my own mug. I didn't want to be a bother. I just didn't want to be in my own house. I sat down, placing the mug on his coffee table, my hands falling into my lap. I stared at the faint wisp of steam rising from the cup, trying to gather my thoughts. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't planned this far ahead. He didn't press me for answers or offer platitudes. He just sat in a chair across from me and waited. After what felt like an eternity of quiet, I finally found my voice. "It's too quiet next door," I whispered, the admission feeling like a betrayal. "I thought I could handle it, but I don't want to be alone right now." He just nodded, his expression one of simple understanding. He told me I didn't need to explain myself. We sat there for a while longer, the silence between us filling the space in a way that felt comforting, not awkward. It was a shared quiet, not an empty one. Eventually, the words began to flow. I started talking about Richard, not the man everyone else knew, but the man I had lived with. I spoke of how our marriage hadn't been a fairy tale, how the last few years had been a slow, painful drift into separate lives. I felt more like his housekeeper than his wife most days. I wasn't weeping as I spoke. It was more of a clinical confession, a release of truths I had held inside for too long. I looked at him, needing him to understand. "I know this must sound terrible," I said, my voice steady. "But a part of me feels like I've already done my grieving. It feels like I lost him emotionally years before I lost him physically." I didn't know what kind of reaction to expect, but he didn't flinch. He just listened, his gaze unwavering, and that was precisely what I needed. Before I left, my eyes drifted around his living room. A comfortable clutter of books, a throw blanket draped over the arm of the couch, a stack of mail on a side table. It was a space that was lived in. A soft, involuntary smile touched my lips. "It's warm in here," I remarked quietly. And with that, I was gone, stepping back out into the cold and returning to the hollow shell of my house. But the brief connection had changed something. The wall between our two quiet lives had been breached. The morning after my first visit to Liam's, I couldn't settle. I had a mountain of paperwork to deal with, Richard's affairs, insurance claims, thank you notes to write. But my mind was a fog. All I could picture was the scene from the day before. Me, on his couch, and him, sitting quietly, offering a space for my fractured thoughts. I couldn't shake the memory of his quiet acceptance. The way he had listened, so honest and without judgment, had worked its way under my skin, not as an irritation, but as a soothing balm. It was a feeling that lingered. By lunchtime, I realized I hadn't eaten a thing. I was staring blankly at an insurance form, the same sentence blurring before my eyes for the 10th time, when a knock came at my own door. I opened it to find him standing there. He wasn't in work clothes, just jeans, sneakers, and a plain gray t-shirt. He held 2 brown paper bags from a local deli, the familiar logo of the sandwich shop a few blocks away, a welcome sight. "I had a feeling you might forget to eat," he said, offering a small, hesitant smile. "I almost did too. I thought I'd bring lunch if that's okay." He didn't wait for my reply, just took a small step forward as I moved aside. It felt strangely familiar, as if this was a normal occurrence, and for some reason, my frayed nerves found comfort in that. We ended up on my back patio. The sky was a blanket of heavy gray clouds, threatening rain, but the air was cool and crisp against my skin. He handed me a sandwich, turkey and provolone, my favorite, though I had no idea how he knew, and we sat in a comfortable silence, unwrapping the crinkling paper. We didn't speak for the first few minutes, and I was grateful he didn't try to force conversation. I took small, mechanical bites, my gaze fixed on the line of aspen trees that bordered my backyard, my mind a million miles away. Eventually, it was I who broke the quiet. "It's so strange," I said, my voice low and raspy. "I thought I would feel more destroyed. I imagined I'd wake up screaming or sobbing, but instead, there's just this hollowness. I feel like I'm an actress walking through a set of someone else's life." I kept my eyes on the trees, not ready to meet his gaze. "I've had this tight knot in my stomach for years, Liam, long before Richard passed. It's as if the grief began when our marriage ended, when we stopped being partners and just became 2 people sharing a mortgage." I let out a long, slow breath and continued, the words tumbling out now that they'd started. "We used to be so close. I truly loved him, but his work became his life. More travel, later nights, less conversation. I started eating dinner by myself, even on the nights he was home. We were sleeping in the same bed, but it felt like we were on different continents. Finally, I turned to look at him, my eyes feeling glassy, but my gaze steady. Have you ever felt like you were slowly becoming invisible in your own house?" He just nodded, a simple, profound gesture that told me he understood the essence of that loneliness, even if he hadn't lived my exact experience. A moment passed, and then a soft, almost embarrassed laugh escaped me. "I'm so sorry. I didn't intend to unload all of this on you. There isn't anyone else to talk to." "You don't have to apologize," he said, his voice gentle but firm. Sometimes you just need someone to sit with you in the quiet. I looked at him then, and my chest filled with a warmth that was pure gratitude and maybe a little surprise. For the next hour, we talked. We left the heavy topics behind and drifted into easier subjects: terrible movies we both secretly loved, our preferred coffee shops in the city, the time I adopted a stray cat that promptly ran away 3 days later. I told him about my disastrous attempt at baking bread during the pandemic, which resulted in a rock-hard lump that could have been used as a doorstop. He laughed, a real hearty laugh, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I saw a flicker of the person I used to be. At one point, as we sat at the patio table, his hand brushed against mine. It was a fleeting touch, but it lingered for a second, just long enough for a current of unexpected warmth to pass between us before I gently pulled my hand away. His expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Suddenly, the air felt charged. "I should go," I said, standing up a bit too quickly. The guilt was a sudden, sharp pang. It's too soon. I don't want you to think I'm just using you as some kind of emotional support animal." He stood as well. "You're not," he said, and I could tell he meant it. I hesitated by the back door. "I just really didn't want to be alone today." He nodded. "Then don't be. Anytime you need to talk, or just not talk, my door is open." A heavy silence settled between us, thick with unspoken things. Neither of us wanted to name the shift that was occurring, but we both felt it. It was a warmth, a closeness that had materialized out of nowhere. I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Liam. Truly." Then I stepped outside and walked across the damp grass back to my own front door. I could feel his eyes on me as I went, my arms crossed tightly over my chest. Something had fundamentally changed. Nothing physical had transpired, no embrace, no defining moment. But an invisible line had been crossed. An unspoken connection had been forged between us, and I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that it wasn't going to simply disappear. The following day began under a veil of quiet. It was a dreary, overcast morning, with a heavy dampness in the air that promised rain. I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, attempting to sort through a stack of mail, but my focus was shot. My thoughts kept drifting next door, circling back to Liam. It wasn't just that he had brought me lunch, it was the feeling of his presence, the way it had settled over me like a warm blanket. His words, his quiet understanding, the way he looked at me with a blend of sympathy and simple human kindness, it all stayed with me. And then there was that moment, the briefest brush of our hands on the patio table, a tiny spark that had felt disproportionately significant. Sometime after noon, I found myself at the window overlooking my backyard, which gave me a clear view of his. I told myself I was just looking at the clouds, but my eyes were searching. And there he was, standing near the edge of his own small porch, arms wrapped around his midsection as if holding himself together. He looked so solitary, so uncertain, like a man on the verge of a decision he wasn't sure he should make. I watched him for a moment, a strange sense of kinship washing over me. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The silence in my house was becoming unbearable again. I started pacing, from the kitchen to the living room and back. I've been going back and forth for the past hour, but I didn't know where else to go. I knew it was too much, too soon, but the alternative, sitting alone in this mausoleum of a house, felt impossible. Finally, I surrendered to the impulse. I walked out my door and knocked on his. When he opened it, I knew he wasn't surprised. He must have seen me at my window, just as I'd seen him. I was wearing a navy blue sweater that drooped off one shoulder and a pair of black leggings. No makeup, no pretense. Just me, raw and exhausted. But my eyes felt intense, like I had wrestled with this decision and had arrived with a purpose, even if I couldn't name it. Can I come in? I asked, my voice soft. Yeah, he said, stepping aside without a flicker of hesitation. I walked past him into the living room, the same path I'd taken before, but my steps were slower this time, more tentative. I felt a deep uncertainty about what I was doing here. I stood in the middle of the room, my gaze sweeping over the familiar, comfortable space as if searching for an answer. I wasn't planning to come over, I admitted after a moment, my voice barely above a whisper. I've been arguing with myself about it all morning, but I couldn't think of anywhere else to be. You don't need a reason, he said gently. I moved toward the couch and curled up on one end, tucking my feet beneath me, a subconscious effort to make myself smaller. He sat in the armchair across from me, creating a comfortable distance. The only sounds were the distant hum of a lawnmower and the steady ticking of an old clock on his wall. I don't know how to be alone, I finally confessed, breaking the stillness. I went from my parents' house straight to living with Richard. That's my entire adult life. There was always someone else there. Now, it's just me. He nodded slowly. That's a difficult adjustment. I let out a shaky breath. The thing is, I felt alone for years, even when he was here. It's like I was already mourning the end of our marriage long before he died. The words were heavy with a truth I had barely admitted to myself. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his focus entirely on me. That kind of loneliness can be brutal, he said. It's a whole different thing when someone is physically present, but emotionally 1,000 miles away. I looked at him then, meeting his eyes directly. My voice dropped even lower. Do you think it's wrong that I don't feel guilty for being here? For talking to you like this, so soon after? He didn't answer right away, and I appreciated that he was considering his words carefully. No, he said finally. I don't think there's a timeline for grief, or for connection. Sometimes people show up in our lives exactly when we need them. That doesn't make it wrong. His words were a release. My shoulders, which I hadn't realized were tensed up to my ears, finally relaxed. It felt like I had been holding my breath, waiting for judgment, and had received absolution instead. I just didn't expect to feel drawn to anyone right now, I whispered, looking down at my hands, which were twisting the hem of my sweater. Neither did I, he admitted quietly. The confession hung in the air between us. I don't want to go back to that house tonight, I said, the words rushing out. Not because I'm trying to run away from it, but because I feel like I'm going to suffocate if I have to sit in that silence again. I could tell from his expression that he heard the desperation in my voice. It wasn't melodrama. It was the plain, unvarnished truth of a woman at her breaking point. You don't have to explain, he said softly. If you need a place to just breathe, I can make up the guest room. I blinked rapidly, fighting back the sudden sting of tears. I didn't expect you to say that. You're not alone, Amelia. I nodded slowly, and for the first time all day, a fragile smile found its way to my lips. Later, while I sat in his living room sipping chamomile tea, I could hear him pulling clean sheets from a linen closet and moving around in the spare bedroom. We didn't talk much more. The silence had returned, but it was a comfortable, protective shield. Before I went to the guest room, I felt I needed to thank him again. I found him in the kitchen, and there was no awkwardness, just a quiet sense of closeness. Thank you, Liam, I said softly, for this, for not asking too many questions, for making me feel like a person again. Then, on impulse, I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a purely human one. My head rested against his shoulder, and I felt his arms come around me, holding me in a steady, calming embrace. It was the kind of hug that anchors you when you feel like you're drifting away. When we finally separated, I whispered, Good night." Then I turned and disappeared down the hall into the room he had prepared for me. He stood there for a moment in the quiet house, and I closed the door, still feeling the lingering warmth of his arms around me. Something had irrevocably changed. I didn't sleep well that night, not because I was afraid or uncomfortable, but because I was acutely aware of everything. I was aware that Liam was just down the hall, a man I barely knew who had shown me more kindness in 3 days than I had felt in years. I was aware of the immense weight of my situation, a widow, just days after burying my husband, seeking refuge in a neighbor's home. The walls of the guest room felt thin, every creak of the house seemed magnified, and my thoughts spun in a relentless loop. I kept replaying the hug. It wasn't born of passion or romance. It was a gesture of profound, honest humanity. It was the kind of embrace you don't forget, not because of what it might lead to, but because of how deeply it was needed. When the first hint of gray light began to filter through the window blinds, I slipped out of bed. The house was completely still. I moved quietly, not wanting to disturb him. In the kitchen, I found the coffee maker and brewed a pot, the rich aroma filling the quiet space. I stood by the window, wrapping my hands around a warm mug, and watched as the soft morning light spilled over the fence into his backyard. About 20 minutes later, I heard the soft, cautious sound of his footsteps. He appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, a light gray blanket from the guest room draped around his shoulders. His hair was messy from sleep, and his expression was calm but tired. He looked different in the morning light, more vulnerable, more real. "Morning," I said quietly. "Hey," he replied with a small, sleepy smile. "I made coffee." He nodded and stepped further into the kitchen, accepting the mug I offered him. We stood there for a long moment, side by side, sipping our coffee in a silence that wasn't empty, but restful. Eventually, I sat down at his small kitchen table, pulling the blanket tighter around me. I stared out the window for a while before speaking. "I have no idea what I'm doing." He sat in the chair across from me. "I don't think you're supposed to, Amelia. You're just figuring things out 1 minute at a time. For now, that's enough." I nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "I keep thinking about yesterday," I said. "Just sitting here, talking, breathing. It felt like I reclaimed a tiny piece of myself that I thought was gone forever." Then I looked at him directly, my eyes searching his. "Richard and we weren't really a team anymore. We shared a roof, we shared a life on paper, but emotionally, we were just two strangers occupying the same space. I didn't even realize how hollow I had become until I walked out of that house." I didn't give him a chance to respond. I could tell he was content to just listen. The words needed to be said, to be given voice in this safe space he had created. "I came here yesterday because I couldn't stand the silence anymore," I continued. "And now I don't want to go back. Not yet." I stayed for the entire day. There was no formal plan. It just happened. Liam made us scrambled eggs and toast for breakfast. I helped him fold a load of laundry, and we both laughed when I discovered a single, bright pink sock that had mysteriously infiltrated his whites. In the afternoon, we went for a slow, meandering walk around the neighborhood. We didn't hold hands, but our shoulders brushed against each other a few times, small points of contact that felt both innocent and significant. The day unfolded with a gentle, unhurried rhythm. That evening, he cooked a simple dinner of pasta with a fresh salad. Afterward, we found ourselves on the couch, a nature documentary playing softly on the television in the background. I had my legs tucked beneath me, nursing a cup of tea. He sat beside me, maintaining a respectful but comforting proximity. "It's strange," I said quietly, breaking the peaceful silence. "I feel a sense of peace here, like I'm allowed to just exist without any expectations. I haven't felt that in so long." I turned to look at him. "You don't have to rush through any of this," he said. "There's no rule book for how you're supposed to feel." I looked up at him, my eyes searching his for something. Permission, perhaps, or just simple understanding. "Do you think it's wrong that I don't feel bad about being here with you?" I asked again, needing the reassurance. "No," he said, his voice soft but certain. "I think you're doing what you need to do to survive. That's never wrong." My head found its way to his shoulder, and I let it rest there. His arm came around me, not in a forceful or suggestive way, but as a steady, supportive presence. And in that quiet moment, something shifted. I lifted my head to look at him, our faces now closer than they had ever been. My gaze lingered on his lips. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my skin. Slowly, tentatively, I leaned in. My lips met his in a kiss that was soft and careful, more of a question than a statement. It wasn't a kiss of passion or fireworks. It was a kiss of connection, of two people finding a moment of solace from pain. I pulled back almost immediately. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the word laced with confusion and guilt. "You don't have to be," he replied, his voice just as quiet. We didn't kiss again. Instead, I leaned back into him, resting my head against his chest this time, and we stayed that way for what felt like an hour, wrapped in the quiet stillness. Something had changed, and though neither of us dared to speak it aloud, we both knew our lives were now intertwined. At the time, I don't think I fully grasped how profound the connection between us had become. In those initial days, we were just two solitary people navigating the difficult circumstances that had been thrust upon us. But as the days turned into a week, the simplicity of our shared moments, the quiet morning coffees, the long, rambling conversations, the comfortable silences, began to feel like the foundation of something more tangible, something real. It wasn't a sudden or dramatic evolution. It was a gradual unfolding that began after that quiet night and the single, hesitant kiss. A question neither of us was ready to answer. We didn't rush into anything more. In fact, after that night, I went back to my own house. We both seemed to understand, without needing to discuss it, that we needed space to process what was happening. But the distance didn't feel awkward. It felt necessary and natural. We were moving at our own pace, a pace dictated by caution and respect. For the next few days, I stayed in my own home. I told him I wasn't ready to abandon it, and he understood completely. I needed to face the silence, to clean the rooms, to sort through the memories that clung to the walls like ghosts. But he became a daily ritual. I would walk over every morning, and he would have a fresh pot of coffee ready. We would sit on his couch and talk, or sometimes not talk at all. The grief was still a constant companion, a heavy weight on my heart, but a quiet companionship was blossoming between us, one that didn't demand grand gestures or sweeping declarations. He would make me laugh with a stupid joke, or I would find myself smiling as he recounted a mundane story from his workday. One morning, he spilled coffee all over the kitchen counter and tried to mop it up with a single paper towel, only succeeding in spreading the mess further. The absurdity of it made me laugh so hard I cried, and I realized it was the first time in a very long time that my tears had come from joy instead of sorrow. I was slowly, steadily, coming back to life. And I could see a change in him too. His quiet reserve was still there, but it was softer now, his smiles more frequent. I was learning to live with my grief, and he was learning how to be a part of that process. I was finding myself again, one small piece at a time. It wasn't an easy or linear journey, but every day we spent together, I could feel myself healing. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about integrating the loss into a new life that was beginning to take shape. Then, one Saturday, about a month after Richard's death, I invited him over to my house for dinner. He hadn't been inside since the day he brought me lunch, and as I waited for him to arrive, I felt a knot of nerves tighten in my stomach. This house was where it all began, the place where my old life had ended. But asking him here felt different. It felt like a deliberate step forward. I cooked a simple pasta dish, something comforting and light. He brought a bottle of wine. We decided to eat on my back patio as the sun began to dip below the Wasatch Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The evening air was cool and pleasant, the kind of night that invites you to sit back and simply be. We didn't talk much during the meal. We didn't have to. The conversation flowed easily, as if we had been sharing dinners like this for years. There was no pressure, no expectation, just the soft clinking of our forks against the plates and the quiet hum of the neighborhood settling in for the night. As the sky darkened and the patio lights cast a gentle glow around us, I looked at him. The look in his eyes was different now. The pity and concern had been replaced by something steadier, more certain. "I think I'm ready," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Ready for what?" he asked, his expression open and curious. "Ready to let myself move forward. I've been so stuck, Liam, and I didn't know how to get out of it. But when I'm with you, I feel like I can. Not because you're fixing me, but because you've helped me see that it's okay to move on, that my life doesn't have to be defined by what I've lost." My words seemed to land with more weight than I intended. He didn't speak at first. He just reached across the small table and took my hand in his. The contact was warm and solid, and it felt completely natural. I knew he understood. He smiled, a genuine, open smile that reached his eyes, and in that moment, I realized how far I had come in such a short time. This was no longer just about me surviving the past. It was about me building something new, something unexpected and good. "I don't need to rush into anything," I continued, my voice gaining confidence. "But when I picture a future now, you're in it. And that means something to me." It was his turn to smile, a hint of nervousness mixed with relief. "I don't need to rush either," he said softly. "We can take it as slow as you need, but I want to be there with you, Amelia. I think we both deserve that." The silence that followed was full of a shared understanding. There were no more questions, just a quiet certainty that whatever was coming next, we would face it together. From that night on, things were different. We didn't fall into a whirlwind romance. We didn't need that. We continued to take our time, building on the foundation we had already laid. We still had our quiet mornings and long evenings filled with conversation and simple activities. We reveled in the easy companionship, and with each passing day, we found ourselves leaning on each other more. We didn't rush, but slowly, surely, we both came to realize that we had found something real, something worth protecting. A few months later, after countless shared dinners and quiet nights, waking up next to him felt like the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't the loud, chaotic love you read about in books. It was a steady, quiet, and true love. It wasn't built on grand gestures, but on the thousands of small shared moments and the unwavering support we offered each other. I was happy, truly happy, and so was he. And that's how I knew this was the right kind of new beginning, one where we both found a way to move forward, not by erasing the past, but by refusing to let it define our future. Our story was no longer about grief. It was about healing and the quiet miracle of a second chance.